Hello, 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 everybody. I titled this today, It's in the Bible, it has to be true. We assume, or I used to, when I'd read the Bible, that it was exactly perfectly, that no flaws, no errors, inerrant Word of God, undisturbed. But we can see that's not true today, because you can go back and get a Geneva Bible or King James and get a Message Bible from today and compare them, and you see all kinds of differences in the language, in the way things are said, because you've got your what's supposed to be literal versions, and then you have your pseudo literal that's kind of literal but kind of transliterates a little bit to make the sentence flow a little better. Then you've got your ones that just flow all over the place that you can't even recognize. So it's pretty deceptive. Well, I guess a couple of years ago, or 3 years now, it's been a while, I had a dream from Father, and he showed me a bowl of soup. And it had all these weird foreign letters in it, and it just looked like a kid's alphabet soup, with all of them mixed up floating on the surface. And he said, "What do you see?" I said, "I don't know. It's a mess." Yeah, he said, "Fix it." I said, "Fix it? I'm 60, I think I was like 60 or 61 so at that point. I was pretty old. And I'm like, I'm too old to be learning another language. I studied Spanish and French and English in school, and then some Latin for nursing. But this is beyond me to go into the Hebrew and the Greek. Well, I started studying Hebrew, and I pretty much tackled Hebrew. Then I moved on to the Greek. And boy, did I find out it's all a mess. It is a mess. And I was very disappointed because I had always thought it was just what it said it was, exactly correct. And that what we had in English was pretty close. It had a pretty decent translation. Used like a King James or an NSAB, which is supposed to be super literal. And I thought, well, I'm getting a pretty literal viewpoint. Wrong. But we also have in Scripture that tells us it's not going to be correct, which is amazing. In Revelation, in particular, it says that they'll gnaw their tongues. And when you actually look at that verse, it says, "And the fifth angel pours out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and the kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues," it says, "for pain." But when you actually get to looking at the Greek on that, it means they devoured the languages. They just chewed them up. I know the New Testament has at least 4 different languages in it. It has Latin in it, it has Greek, it has some Hebrew, and it has some French that I know of, and a little Spanish. Maybe that's 5. But it's a lot of different languages. And this was part of what was going to happen, and it's going to happen, but we don't want to admit it because it's so much easier just to pick up that English version and go, "Oh yeah, I got it all now." We don't. Unless you start word searching and really looking at it, you're not going to see the whole picture. It's like a broken box of crayons. It's going to still color a picture, but it won't be the greatest picture in the world. But when you actually start digging into the manuscripts and learning the Greek and the Hebrew, you'll see a much clearer picture of what's going on. We got a lot of different things. You've got the cloven tongues that they received, that everybody thinks is the Holy Spirit. Well, a cloven tongue is actually a serpent's tongue. The only creatures that have those is like snakes and lizards. And it means to separate or divide in part, and they're on fire. So we know that can't be a good thing. It says in Acts, "And suddenly there came a sound from heaven, and a rushing mighty wind, and filled the house where they were sitting. And there appeared on them cloven tongues, like as of fire, and sat upon each of them." We know that Yahweh talks about confounding the language too in Genesis. Genesis 11:9. "Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad on the face of the earth." And that was the Tower of Babel. Well, we've kind of got a Tower of Babel built now, because we have the computers, and the computers make it where we can read any language we want to read. I think it was Chuck Missler, a long time ago when I used to watch him. He said there's no excuse for any Christian today not knowing what's in the Bible exactly, because of the computers, that the programs that are out now can make it where you can actually see every word, what it meant in the first century, what it means today. And he was right on that. He was wrong on a lot of things, but he was right on that. Luke 16:24 gives us a hint about the tongues of fire. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me and send Lazarus. And Lazarus means the one whom God helps, that he may dip the tip of his finger into the water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. So, and I think James even mentioned something about the tongue too. Is who can tame it? There's all kinds of things about the tongue, and a lot of it has to do with language. When you get to looking at it, it's the glossa, or the language. The tongue, the member of the body, or the organ of speech, but it can also mean a language, a dialect used. I want to show you one place that really plays a biggie. Matthew 3:16, we have, and Jesus, when he was baptized, went straight up out of the water, and lo, the heavens were opened unto him, and he saw the Spirit of God, or Theon, descend like a dove, and lighting upon him. Well, when you go look at the word for dove in Greek, it's pistera. What is a pistera? Well, you're just told in Strong's it's a dove. But if you go to first century etymologies and search for it, you'll find out that it's the Greek word for like a deity, the bird of Ishtar, a cohort of Yahweh who was the Old Testament deity, a Semitic love goddess who shares even elements with Aphrodite according to, it comes from Pir Ishtar, which is Hebrew, and it means the bird of Ishtar. And she was also considered a nymph. She was one of the sacred birds that was used in first century. You'll see her even in a lot of the Vatican artworks and stuff, something that they were familiar with, that we wouldn't be familiar with today. When you say pistera, we wouldn't know what that was. And where did this spirit drag him immediately? When you think about the context, it dragged Jesus out into the wilderness to be what? Tempted. And we're told that God tempts nobody. So who was that dragging him out in the wilderness to be tempted? These are the kind of things that go through my head when I'm reading. I'm always questioning. People wonder how I come up with the things I find and everything. That's why, because when I look at a sentence, I don't just take it for face value. I look around it. I look at what's going on, who's involved, what happens. Does it match everything else? Does it match the Old Testament? Does it match what's going on in the New Testament? I ask all these questions when I look at verses. We have this other word in the New Testament called stosia. Stosia is used in 2 Peter 3:12. It says, looking for and hastening until the coming of the day of God, wherein the heavens, being on fire, shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The word for stosia is the same one they use for elements. Well, what is a stosia? A stosia in the first century was a evil spirit or evil spiritual powers. They were feared and they were perceived to have been operating daily in the daily affairs of everybody's life. And when I looked at this, it says that he's anticipating and rushing in the presence of Theon's day, or God's day, through the feverish skies, resolved and dissolved, and the evil spirits, and it also can be data today, if you put it in a modern sense, and they're being burned or melted. So today, Astosia is now a way that we look at materials. It's a new material for a specific task. It hails a new age thing. It's a material that produces capabilities and new applications of humanity in imaginary currents. It's a mega library synthesis, high throughout screening technology, and a data-driven machine learning. So Stosia today is machine learning, or computer stuff. So we have all these things we can look at. We can look at the meaning in the past. We can look at the meaning just for the face value in English, or we can look at the meaning for the future. It's pretty interesting. And the stosia of the spirits of the land, this is from the scholars, are spirits of the land in the Greek mythology. They were often described as non-human spirits that inhabit the mountains, the valleys, and the bodies of water. The word stosia can also be translated of the first origin. And first fruits were offered to the stosia as a way to respect them. In ancient villages, a parade and dancing was held to ward off the winter's negative spirits, and the parade took place in the spring equinox. And Paul mentions them also in Colossians 2, 8 and 20, and in Galatians 4, 3 and 9. Then we have Peter mention them, like I said, he mentions them in 3, 10 and 12, and they're also mentioned in Hebrews 5, 12. In the Bible, Paul uses the word to describe a force of violence or a power that are not like God. He believed that the coming of the Christ into the world marked the shift of the organization of the cosmos and was an end of the dominance of the angelic powers. So he did see them as elemental powers, but he mentions them in quite a little different way. Now we're going to talk about another something you may not know is in there. These are all things that you wouldn't know are in there unless you dig in. That's what the point of tonight is to show things that you might not ordinarily hear about. This is interesting because Pan is in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Pan is the deity of the underworld, or satyr. He's half goat, half human, plays the panpipes, and is thought to be a forest of the forest. He caused panic in people's lives. This is a man. I found this article. This is one thing that spurred me to do this. He called the article "Bringing Down the Spirit of Pan." It's by Brad McLennan, and I put the address on here if you want to look him up. But this poor man was yet another victim being terrified by Yahweh to me. This is what he said. Years ago, I encountered and experienced the demonic spirit of Pan. I felt it was important to write this article so people would have and encountered the same type of experience from the enemy, would receive understanding and no longer be ignorant of one of Satan's devices. About 6 years ago, I had a visitation of what I would call a creature from the ancient world of darkness. I was living in a cabin tucked away in the mountains of North Carolina, and in the middle of the night, I woke and went to the bathroom. I suddenly heard our cabin door open, and the sound of 2 animal hooves began walking across the hardwood floors. I looked and there stood a demonic beast that had the appearance of a goat from the waist down, and the upper half was the shape of a man, with 2 horns coming out of his head. I immediately felt my heart begin to beat immensely with fear and panic, and I realized this was being sent from the beast. I asked the spirit, "Who is this creature?" Immediately he said, "Pan." I never heard of the name before that, but later I would search out the word and get understanding of this demonic spirit. Pan then spoke to me with a prideful, arrogant attitude mixed with a great hate, and he said, "I'm going to do everything I can to take you out." I then replied, "You must leave now." With the hateful groans, he turned around and left the cabin. After this encounter, I began prayerfully seeking information on this creature. I found that he was a mythological Greek creature. Many creatures are demonic spirits that we have been called in mythological gods are not mythological at all. They are real kingdom of darkness. Pan's appearance with the horns, ears, legs of a goat, of a man's body, his sudden appearance was supposed to cause terror similar to a stampeding herd. In fact, the word panic is derived from this name. Even today, he's roaming to and fro, devouring people with fear and panic. See, this man, he messed up. He only sought out Yahweh and Paul's words. There wasn't a single word in his entire article about Jesus or what Jesus had to say about this, when he should have been looking at the words from and about Jesus. Then he would have found this spirit that was attached to the Christ one, which is the wrong Jesus. The real Jesus was Jesus Barabbas. And he was yet another victim of being terrified by Yahweh, I think. The creature he saw was very real. It's even in the Bible. It's mentioned in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Because of mistranslations, most people never even know it's there. And that's what I'm going to show you. This is him in the little middle thing. In Leviticus 16:5, from the congregation of the sons of Israel, 2 kids of the goats for a sin offering, and 1 ram for a burnt offering. And then in Leviticus 16:6, and Aaron shall bring near the bull the sin offering, which is his own, and he shall make atonement for himself and for his house. When you look at the word for kid, it's H8163. It's actually a satyr. It's one of these creatures that this man saw at that cabin. Same thing. It's pretty amazing. Unless you are looking specifically at each word, you're going to miss some of these. And some of them are hid on purpose. We have it mentioned here in Genesis 4, and I'm going to read this whole section because I think this is important. But the Lord said unto him, All right then, if anyone kills Cain, or unalives Cain, will be avenged 7 times as much. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would strike him down. So Cain went out from the presence of the Lord, and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain was intimate with his wife, and she became pregnant, and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was building a city, and he named the city after his son Enosh. To Enosh was born Arad, and Arad was the father of Mehulah, and Mehulah fathered Methuselah, and Methuselah was the father of Lamech. Lamech took 2 wives for him, and the name of the first was Adah, and the name of the second was Zillah. Adah gave birth to Jabal, or Yabal. It's actually a Y, Y-A-B-A-L. He was the first of those who lived in the tents and kept livestock. The name of his brother was Ubal, and he was the first of all who played the harp and the flute. So Ubal was the first of the satyrs. Now Zillah gave birth to Tubal-Cain, who heated metal and shaped all kinds of tools into bronze and iron. The sisters of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, Listen to me, you wives of Lamech, hear my words. I have unalived a man for wounding me, a young man for hurting me. If Cain is avenged 7 times as much, then Lamech 77 times. And Adam was intimate with his wife again, and gave birth to a son, and she named him Seth, saying, God has given us another child in the place of Abel, because Cain unalived him. And the son was also born to Seth, whom he named Enosh, and at that time, this is when people started worshiping the Lord. That's when they started the worship of the Lord. I find that real interesting too. Yuval is a name, but it also means ram's horn. So he had a ram's horn, and he played the panpipes, the flute. And when it's described as actually a panpipe in Hebrew, it's a musical instrument. So this would be your first talk of there being a satyr, and that's in Genesis 4:21. So the symbols of this creature are the flute, that pan flute. It's usually a pan flute, and it represents a connection to the rustic music and nature, the natural world. He also has a shepherd's hook. He's considered to be the god of the shepherds, and he's sometimes shown as a shepherd's crook, like the rounded one, and a role of a protector. He's supposed to guide over the flocks. The sacred animals they call to him is the goats and the sheep. And it says that Yahweh separates the goats and the sheep. That goes right along with that. And he did give the word, this is where the word panic came from. One story involving Pan is a tale of war in which Pan helps his friend survive a vicious struggle by letting out an immense cry and frightening the enemy and causing him to run away. And this story is where we get the word panic from. It's sudden, uncontrolled fear that leads people to be irrational in their behavior. And that this picture of this pan, guess where that's at? That is a face that's below the list of the popes that are buried at St. Peter's Cathedral. That's actually a picture that's in St. Peter's Cathedral, where they have the whole list of the names of the ones that are buried. How many times is this creature mentioned by name? In the Old Testament, it's mentioned, let's see, in the KJV, 59 times, in the NAS, 52 times, and in the ACS, they mention it 59 times. And it varies depending on where you're looking, what verse you're looking at. It can be described as hairy, a devil, a goat, a kid, satyr, a demon, a male goat, a shaggy goat, a wild goat, but it's always the same word. They should have just named it what it was and let it go at that so people would know the truth. This is where I think you get the Sabbath day too, the Saturday or Satan's day. I think it's the same place that comes from. Because when Jesus was healing, he said, "And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound for 18 years, be loosened from the bond on this Sabbath day?" He was giving you a hint. What was she bound to on the Sabbath day that he was so particular? John 5:16, and this is why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. He did all his healings almost on the Sabbath. You can see this hints of this, even this creature in Habakkuk 3:19. The Lord Master is my strength. He makes my feet like those of a deer and makes me walk on the high places. To the chief singer with my stringed instrument, because Pan also sometimes has a stringed instrument. Now this is the biggie. This is this is when you get into the Hebrew, when you see something different, that it just like throws you for a loop. Because when you look at Genesis 27:11, we have that Esau was a hairy man and that Jacob was a smooth man. When you really get to looking at the Hebrew, he wasn't smooth. He was divided, part smooth, part hairy. The word is actually used means divided. So both of them were satyrs too, which they don't tell you that either. And he said, Jacob, to Rebekah, his mother, both Esau, my brother, man, or the satyr, it is in Hebrew, and myself, I'm divided. I'm part. He was telling her, he's hairier, but I'm divided. So he must have had more of a human form of talk, because he was the one that put the fur to deceive his father on his hands. And everybody makes out like it's a good thing what he did, and it's not a good thing. It's an evil thing that he did. He deceived his own father. This carries over even into the New Testament. We have the word pan in 1 John 4:2 and 3. It just blew me for a loop there for a minute, because most of the time when you see all or every, you'll see PAS or this other word that they use, but not pan. And every translator that I threw this in, I was getting pan when I was checking to see if it was correct or not. But then when you go to Strong's, they've got pas down there, PAS, instead of PAN. So they're leading you to the word for every, but it's not even spelled the same. But when you get to looking at it, it says, by this you will know the Spirit of God. The Pan Spirit is the one that confesses Jesus Christ that has come in the flesh, is from God. And it says every, and the Pan Spirit does not confess Jesus is Lord, is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard is coming and is now in the world already. And that's just the scary thing. And I'm going to show y'all, there's a messed up area in the transcript on this, and I have worked on this several times, and I'm still not done with it. These two verses. So, but I want to show y'all why. Because it's very important that we keep looking at this and trying to figure it out. Because this is one of our clues as to which one is the good one and which one's not. Luke gives us kind of heads up on all this coming. Luke 7:32 through 35, he said, "They are like children sitting in the marketplace, calling to one another. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We sang the dirge, and you did not weep. For John the Baptist has come eating no bread and drinking no wine, and you say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking. Look at him, a glutton, a drunkard, a friend of a tax collector and sinners. Yet wisdom is justified by her children." Sophia, another deity. Wisdom. So all the people that are all in hyped into Sophia, that's not a good thing. They're justifying stuff, is what he's saying. When you look at the top, that pi, alpha, and then that V is an N, that spells pan. When you go down, it sends you down to, it says 3956 in the Strongs, G3956. You go down to G3956, and what do you see? PAS. Pies. Not pan. What are they doing here? Something's bad wrong. That's not even the same word. So I thought, well, maybe they did it through the whole book. And it's just the way they saw it, because pan can mean all also, but there are scholars that think that that's was just something they brought up. They don't think it's real. That it never meant all. There's a mixed bag on the scholars on that. So I brought up another verse. This is where they have the word all or every, and it's in Matthew 13:56. But it's spelled correctly, PAS. And it goes down to the same number as the other verse, which is, pan is not pies. There's no way to make them the two same word. I just wanted to double check with where else they used every and all to make sure that it wasn't just this verse and maybe the whole thing was, like that. But it's not. There's some kind of potential monkey business going on with it. And this is the monkey business right here. Look at that verse there. Do you see all that scratched through stuff and letters written up above and see all that mess? I don't know what they've done to that part of that sentence in verse 2, and I cannot figure out what it says. I've looked and looked and looked at it, and it makes no sense with the context. I'm stumped on that one. So I guess I'm just going to keep looking and see if I can find another manuscript that I can find online that might have that same verse in it. But I spent all day long trying to figure that out. You can ask Alyn, bless her heart. I kept bugging her. I was going, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And it's like, because it wasn't making any sense. But I know it has to deal with the two Jesuses, because in one verse, in verse 2, they're talking about the Christ one. And then in verse 3, they're talking about the other one. And John does that quite a bit in these three epistles. And that is the crux of where I think that the epistles were written, to try to explain further what's going on in the Gospel of John for people that weren't understanding. Because he's doing a lot of warning about not accepting the wrong one, too. So this is real important that we decipher this stuff. I'm saying we because I need y'all all hands on deck on this. Because if I get stumped, then we got to get it right. I don't want to give it out there and give it wrong. Can't do that. This was another place I looked, and it's definitely Pan Spirit. One verse. Now, when they do the King James, they're using Jesus Christ, even though it's not in the manuscript. On one of the verses, on verse 3, it says Lord Jesus in the manuscript, and they've got it down as Jesus Christ. This is a bunch of the places that I went to see what the translators would say, the automatic translators. And I've got about 6 now, because they've added 2 more. But Lingstar is one of my favorites, because it has not been programmed yet to just spit out KJV, so it gives a more accurate picture than the other one. But every one of those say pan. Every one of them say that word means pan. And then when I went over to PAS, they all said all or every, any, or each. And each was down on the bottom of because they give you all is the normal translation for PAS. P-A-S. This is where I found that there's two different Jesuses mentioned. And it's distinct. You can tell it because that on the top one, that's the Jesus Christ one. When you see that big X with the V thing, that's the Christ one. Now, when you see the K with the V, that means Lord or Master. The I looking with the V, that's the Jesus word. So they're separate. Two different Jesuses being talked about in verse 2 and verse 3. And this is 1 John 4, verse 2 and 3 if you want to look it up. And the writing you're looking at there is from the Codex Sinaiticus. So that I'll put that on the tape so you know where it's coming from. This is the actual manuscript. And yes, they got it right. In the red box, the bottom one is Lord, the top one is Christ. The blue box, the top one is Jesus, and the bottom one is Jesus in the Koine. And that's how hard it is to find the words in there. In the Koine Greek, there's no breaks between the words. Every now and then you'll see a punctuation, a period, that'll tell you that's the end of the sentence. Like if you look right there, in between you'll see a word that says E-C-T-I-N, it looks like in English. You'll see a little dot after that. That's telling you that's the end of a sentence or a punctuation. But not very often. Most of the time it's like reading a run-on one of those find word books. So I sit there and I try to find each word and see if anybody has messed. Those don't look messed with at all. They're good and clean. They're in the same type of ink. They're the same color density. I don't see any problem with those two words. So that was probably the intent that John really wanted. Here I'm showing, on the left I've got the Codex Sinaiticus that I wrote out and then translated it. And then on the right is where I translated the KJV or the Textus Receptus manuscript. And one of them has Christ in it and one has Lord Jesus. Now the Codex Sinaiticus is the oldest one. I think all this was done on purpose. And this is more where I was looking at the words for every. I found another word, kaith. I think I told y'all about that one last time I showed this slide. But kaith is another word for every besides pos. And I kept wondering why they kept coming up with pan as being pos. It made no sense. Here's another problem I'm seeing. I'm just trying to show y'all what I'm dealing with when I'm looking at this stuff, because people ask me to check a verse. It's massive. It takes me a long time to check a verse. I might not get back to you for a month because it's a lot of looking in everything. But this one blew me away too, John 18:15. Because they've got in the KJV, and Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. That disciple was known unto the high priest, and went in with Jesus into the palace of the high priest. And when I looked at it, he followed the Jesus Simon Peter. It's all one name. There's no break. There's no punctuation. There's nothing. And another disciple or student, that student, he was known. He knew the high priest, in other words. What he's saying is he knew the high priest. They went in with the Jesus into the palace of the high priest. So it's one whole name, Jesus, Simon, Peter. That's just wild. And they had to move Simon Peter to the very front of the verse to get it to read like they've got it. They had to literally pick it up out of the context and put it at the first of the verse to get it to read the way they have it. So there's some really messed up stuff. And I got to looking at the word for Jesus. Yeah, there I show it. But this red box here I've got, that's one whole box. Because when you're looking at the Koine Greek, the words they'll literally go from one line to the next before the next word starts. There's nothing to tell you that that's one whole word, but it is. That word that I have the red box around, that's Simon. The IY looking thing before it, that's Jesus. And this Petra right there behind it is Peter. So they're back to back with there's no punctuation or anything in between those names, which means it's probably one whole name. Because back then they added the names, they stacked the names like that. I'll show you why. This is why. You had a personal name, a family name, and a title, usually. Sometimes you could have even more than one family name, but usually at least one. And Jesus could be a family name. Jesus could also be a personal name. And Christ was usually a title, but it could be a personal name also. So now we have multiple people with Jesus in their name when you literally go look at the Koine. And no wonder they say there were so many Jesuses. They know. They have to know. It makes me mad, really. Because there's people out there with a lot of more education than I've got in Greek. But what I ultimately got after I looked that verse over was, but he followed the Jesus, Simon Peter, and another disciple. He, the high priest, was known and went in with Jesus into the palace of the high priest. And I do think that Cleopas, the one that said it was better for one to unalive than the whole nation, I do think that was Peter. Because it's another word for his name in just a different language. And that's what I mean. They gnawed up the glossa, the tongue. They just kept changing the languages so we would stay confused so we wouldn't know the truth. And now we got a mess to unbury. That's basically my spiel for